Hello students, welcome to this lecture. Today we will be learning about the role of bureaucracy in development. Now let's first discuss the objectives of this lecture. To understand the meaning of bureaucracy and development, to assess the different dimensions of development, to analyze the role of bureaucracy in development, and finally to understand the reforms needed in the bureaucracy and development in India. So dear students, let's first start with the introduction. As a student of public administrations, we must be familiar with the term bureaucracy. It's a term with strong emotional overtones and elusive implications. Bureaucracy is also a much researched area by public administrators, political scientists, sociologists, and many others. As a result, there is no terminological accuracy about the concept of bureaucracy. To some, it is efficiency, and to others, it is inefficiency. To some, it is a term synonymous with civil service, and to others, it refers to a body of officials. The term development is generally used to refer to economic, political, and social changes such as increase in national income, industrialization, strengthening of the nation state, urbanization, and spread of education, and wider use of mass media such as newspapers, radio, and television. The bureaucracy, both governmental and business, participates in bringing about these changes and so is said to be an important instrument of development. However, there is a big debate about this conception of development and hence about the role of the bureaucracy. Thus, Mahatma Gandhi maintains that such development modeled on Western civilization accentuates selfishness and violence, leads to concentration of power and wealth, and puts emphasis on material needs instead of spiritual development. His ideal society would, therefore, do away with all concentration of power and wealth, and hence also with bureaucracy. Karl Marx is also opposite to concentration of power and wealth. In his view, this concentration reaches its maximum in capitalist society. The supersession of capitalism would, in the course of time, do away with the bureaucracy also. Max Weber maintains that the bureaucracy is an efficient instrument for implementing policies of state. But it is also a source of alienation in the society. We thus note that both the conception of development and the role of bureaucracy are highly controversial matters. Therefore, it's very important first to understand the role of bureaucracy in development. So, dear students, let's try to understand the relationship between bureaucracy and development. Now, how does bureaucracy matter for development? Over the last years, an enormous interest in this question has created a large body of research, mostly focused around evidence from field experiments and micro-level administrative data. The first step in dealing with the impasse in the theory of bureaucracy and development is to examine its conceptualization. Max Weber's construct represents the classical formulation. It's interesting to note that in its essentials it is present many centuries before Max Weber in the Arthashastra of Kautilya. The society of the Arthashastra, like that described in Kings and referred to by the prophets in the Old Testament, had some features of capitalism: private property, money, market exchange, division of labor, and a marked division between rich and poor. In both societies, there is to be found a conflict between the tribal society with communal property and the more impersonal economic process of a more complex stratified society. In the Earth Shastra, we find a clear picture of the emergence of a bureaucracy in a capitalistic and conflictual society. The balance between the conflicting tribal chiefs and farmer traders on the one hand and between these powerful classes and the poor on the other hand is maintained by the state. The state bureaucracy is marked by the maintenance of written records, payment of fixed salaries in panas. Panas was a silver coin of 3.5 grams. A clearly defined hierarchy, division of labor, placement of high officials according to personal attributes, code of law, and impersonality. Now let's have a look on the characteristics of bureaucracy mentioned by Weber. So Weber was earlier discussed by Hegel also in his philosophy of law. Hegel held that the bureaucracy serves the general interest. In his devastating critique, Marx showed that, on the contrary, it is the instrument of the powerful and involves exploitation and hence alienation, loss of freedom, loss of creativity, loss of humanity, and loss of morality. Therefore, Weber's contribution obviously does not consist mainly in the formulation of the ideal type of bureaucracy, but rather in the legitimation of this instrument for the exercise of power. Henry Fayol is deeply concerned with the function of administration, which, according to him, consists of forecasting and planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling. F. W. Taylor clearly sees the function of managers to be rewarding and punishing workers for making their produce more. Now, Herbert A. Simon defines administration as decision making, thus leading to a clear distinction between administrators and operatives. However, for Weber, the one blanket concept of bureaucracy covers both administrators and workers. This serves to hide the fact that the function of administration consists in exercising controls over skilled and unskilled workers and clients on behalf of the rulers or owners. The distinction between administrators and workers could remain hidden to some extent in prosperous societies, where both could wear almost the same dress, eat the same food, and speak the same language. In poor societies, however, there is a marked difference in their experience of life. Workers often come from poor migrant families without provision for health or education. In a country like India, where over 90% of the labor is unorganized, most workers have to start working when they are children at very low wages for long hours in unsanitary conditions, without protection against industrial disease, and without compensation in case of injury or death. Bureaucracy is an integral part of executive in theory as well as practice. In the theoretical perspective, bureaucracy plays an important role for making the future framework of policies and programs of the government. For the practical purpose, bureaucracy makes efforts to implement all policies. In India, bureaucracy has the same framework of actions. Starting from the viewpoint of then President of United States of America, Woodrow Wilson, 1887, who made first remark and study on bureaucracy, linking with the role of administration, followed by a detailed study of bureaucracy as an institution by Max Weber, have developed the study the role of bureaucracy as a subject discipline across the world. In the democratic nation like India, where all actions are subject to further audit based on the procedures and process declared by the respective law for which a specialized and skilled agency are required, so that permanency can be maintained. Now, dear students, let's have a look on the understanding the concept of development. Development describes the growth of humans throughout the lifespan, from conception to death. The scientific study of human development seeks to understand and explain how and why people change throughout life. This includes all aspects of human growth, including physical, emotional, intellectual, social, and perceptual and personality development, among others. The scientific study of development is important not only to psychology but also to sociology, education, and healthcare. Development does not just involve the biological and physical aspect of growth, but also the cognitive and social aspects associated with the development throughout life. Development is a complex issue with many different and sometimes contentious education and development definitions. A basic perspective equates development with economic growth. The United Nations Development Programme uses a more detailed definition that reads, and I quote, "Development is to lead long and healthy lives, to be knowledgeable, to have access to the resources needed for a decent standard of living, and to be able to participate in the life of the community." Unquote. Achieving human development is linked to a third perspective of development, which views it as freeing people from obstacles that affect their ability to develop their own lives and communities. Development, therefore, is empowerment. It is about local people taking control of their own lives, expressing their own demands, and finding their own solution to their problems. Development has many meanings depending on the context it's being talked about. It refers to transforming the people's ways of living, doing things for the better. So this was actually the definition by the Advanced Oxford Learners Dictionary. Now, in the context of knowledge and learning, it is the positive transformation, or you can say the change of people's ways of living, attitudes, and behaviors as a result of their exposure or access to relevant, educate, and timely information services. In short, development means the movement upward of the entire social system. This social system encloses, besides the so-called economic factors, all non-economic factors, including all sorts of consumption by various groups of people. Consumption provided collectively, educational and health facilities and levels, the distribution of power in the society, and more generally, economic, social, and political stratification. Broadly speaking, institutions and attitudes to which we must add. Now, dear students, let's have a look on the role of bureaucracy to development. Bureaucracy has spread throughout the world. It's an essential condition for every society's modernization, where bureaucracy plays an important role. The bureaucracy has developed its expertise in shaping the vision for nation building and contributes to meet the goal of the growth and making the nation viable for development. All such actions related with socio-economic development have been associated with mostly public organizations based on the principle of the modern public administration. By acting as an advisor, innovator, and decision maker, the bureaucracy makes a significant contribution to development. It can revitalize administration by creating a social environment that values accountability, encouraging healthy competition and self-development, organizing institutional management under competent and progressive leadership, and delegating authority to lower levels for the purpose of maximizing development. The bureaucracy is the method through which the state accomplishes its objectives. A high level of bureaucratic expertise is required to expedite development initiatives. The people in developing societies suffer from a number of problems such as poverty, unemployment, bad health, illiteracy, corruption, and authoritarianism. The state is considered to be the main agency for dealing with these, or in other words, for bringing about development. Hence, the state has to shoulder more and more responsibility. Since the state functions through the government and the government in turn depends to a large extent upon the bureaucracy, the bureaucracy's role also keeps expanding. During colonial rule, India was held together by the steel frame of the Indian civil service, hence the great power of this service. It is notable that 4 decades after independence, the Indian Administrative Service, which has taken the place of the Indian Competitive Service, still performs this function. In no developed federation do we have a service like our IAS, whose members hold all the top positions at all the levels: central, state, regional, and local. Officers in the secretariats who participate in policy formulation as well as implementation at the highest levels as advisors to central and state ministers. Many of the directors and directors general, divisional commissioners, district magistrates, and commissioners of municipal corporations are all generally drawn from IAS. At the local level, particularly, direct rule by the bureaucracy continues. The district magistrate combines in himself functions as varied as the maintenance of law and order, revenue collection, and the coordination of development programs. The elected rural and urban local bodies have very limited resources and are weak otherwise also. And these are often superseded by the state government if an opposition party happens to come into the power in these. On their supersession, the district magistrate takes over their functions also. We shall briefly examine the contribution of bureaucracy in the various aspects of development. Now, dear students, let's see the role of bureaucracy in economic development. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was believed that the state should restrict itself to the country's defense and the maintenance of law and order, and that it should intervene in the economy as little as possible. This we've changed, particularly after the Great Depression of the 1930s. In which millions of people became unemployed the world over. Nowadays, all governments are expected to regulate the economy so as to bring about an increase in production, a high level of employment, moderate prices of commodities, and check over monopolies and unhealthy trade practices. The need for such regulations of the economy is all the more great in developing countries like India due to widespread poverty and unemployment on the one hand and the great power of monopolists on the other. The government regulates the economy through fiscal policies by modulating taxes and monetary policies by modulating money supply. Planning, which means resources allocation through a centralized administrative process, is resorted to for achieving economic growth. The government develops means of transport and communication. It provides loans and raw materials to industrialists and farmers. All these governmental activities are performed by government departments, nationalized banks, and other public undertakings through their officials. Hence, the bureaucracy has a very important new role, namely that of functioning as the agent of economic development. More and more economists, statisticians, and trained managers are needed for the proper performance of this role. Dear students, now let's have the look on the role of bureaucracy in the welfare state. In recent times, there has been a tendency for entrusting the state with more and more responsibility for social services, such as the provision of education, health care, employment, labor welfare, the welfare of the blind and other handicapped persons, and the welfare of widows and orphans. So much importance is attached to these new functions that the state has been renamed as the welfare state. The provision of such varied social services require large numbers of different types of specialists, such as teachers, doctors, nurses, labor officers, and social workers. With their recruitment as members of the bureaucracy, the nature of bureaucracy tends to change. The new role requires a new kind of bureaucracy. Now, dear students, let's see the state and bureaucracy as agents of social change. In olden days, prophets and saints like Gautam Buddha, Jesus Christ, Guru Nanak, and Swami Dayanand called for changing various social practices, norms, and rituals. Nowadays, however, many such changes are sought to be brought about with the help of laws. Thus, untouchability, bigamy, child marriage, and dowry system have been declared illegal. Now let's have a look on the state and bureaucracy as agents of political development. The emotional bonds of nationalism are often weak in new nations. However, unless these bonds are strengthened, the nation is in danger of falling apart, as happened, for example, in Pakistan, from which Bangladesh broke away. The state and its bureaucracy play an important part in strengthening these emotional bonds. Thus, national integration is sought to be promoted through education, radio, and television programs. Development of native language, publication of good quality literature in native languages, cultural and sport activities in which persons from all parts of the nation participate, and so on. These programs are often conducted by the members of the bureaucracy. In a country where the national bonds are weak, having a bureaucracy which is centrally recruited and whose members serve in different parts of the country also helps to hold the nation together. Political development is also promoted by strengthening interest groups such as labor unions. Legislation which sanctions and supports trade union activity thus helps to bring about political development. Insofar as the bureaucracy participates in the formulation and implementation of such legislation, it has a role in political development. Political parties also constitute an important part of the political system. In some countries, nowadays, political parties are provided with election funds by the state. This reduces the dependence of the parties on the rich, help to curb corruption, and promotes political development. Elections constitute an important part of the democratic political process. They must be conducted with honesty and impartiality. Otherwise, the people will lose faith in the system and it's likely to collapse sooner or later. Insofar as the bureaucracy conducts elections honestly and efficiently, it helps to maintain and develop the political system. For it is through elections that new parties and leaders come to power and implement programs of social change desired by the people. Besides the already discussed role, the developmental role of bureaucracy can also be divided into 5 major categories. Number 1, policy formulation. The political leaders are not expert, but they are only the representative of the people, while permanent executives are experts and know the every nook and corner of the government. In many cases, the political leaders lack the required expertise and professional skills for developmental planning. Under these circumstances, the role of senior administrator in the policy formulation for development becomes all the more important. The functions of senior administrators, as conventionally recognized, encompass the formulation of policy, coordination of administrative machinery. They are assisting in the preparation of legislative measures and to ensure the government decisions are properly implemented. They also advise on the financial and administrative implications of different policy alternatives. Second, advice on financial matters. In financial matters, administrators determine the allocation of funds for the implementation of plans and according to priorities. They also advise on the revenue generation and expenditure of the government. Now, the number 3, that is implementation of the policies. Now, besides policy formulation, senior administrators are involved in implementing them and giving directions to lower level bureaucrats for this purpose. They also monitor the implementation process. And fourth is the training functions. Senior administrators are responsible to interpret the public policy to the lower level of bureaucracy and to train the latter in the methods to be adopted to achieve its goals. Senior administrators devote some time in training junior administrators working under them. And finally, the 5th one, that is political dimension. By and large, politicians tend to regard them as instruments for facilitating and carrying out political dictates, and thus may even use them as scapegoats for achieving certain political ends. Senior administrators are responsible for policy analysis and advice for the management of the department or offices entrusted to them, as well as for the implementation and monitoring of programs for mobilization of resources and provisions of leadership for the realization of said goals. Middle level bureaucracy are constitute of directors, block development officers and panchayat officers, deputy commissioners and technical personnel holding class 1 posts at the directorate and field level performs several important roles in socio-economic development. Personnel at the middle bureaucracy are required to ensure coordination at the state, district, and local levels. They act as the channel of communication between policy making and policy implementation. They have field responsibilities for the implementation of developmental tasks. They have a great deal of supervisory, inspection, and direction tasks to do. They analyze and communicate the data and other valuable information for the formulation of the public policies and plans to the secretariat and planning bodies. Now, let's have a look on the reforms needed in the bureaucracy and development in India. The bureaucracy plays an important role in governance and development in India. But there are problems that limit how well bureaucrats promote development. Reforms are needed to improve the functioning of the bureaucracy. Problems in the bureaucracy affect development. Some problems could be faster decision making due to red tape and hierarchy. Bureaucrats lack accountability and performance incentives. There is excessive political interference affecting meritocracy. Bureaucrats need more specialization and domain expertise. There is inefficiency, corruption, and unethical practices. Bureaucrats need to update education and training, ignoring the needs of a developing economy. There needs to be more transparency in decision making and recruitment. These problems have resulted in the slow implementation of policies, inefficient delivery of services, high corruption costs, and unequal growth. Reforms are needed to address these issues and improve the role of bureaucracy in promoting India's development. The following reforms can help to improve how the bureaucracy promotes India's development. More transparency in decision making, transfers, posting and recruitments can improve efficiency, reduce corruption, and increase accountability. Bureaucrats need intensive training to upgrade their skills in areas related to development. Bureaucrats should focus on specific development domains aligned with India's economic needs. Recruitment of bureaucrats through fair and merit-based methods will bring in better talent and improve competence. More decision-making powers should be delegated to lower-level bureaucrats for speedier implementation. A strong performance management system should be established with key result areas linked to development outcomes. The government must reduce political interference in the transfers, posting, and promotion of bureaucrats. Bureaucrats need to utilize modern technologies for faster and more transparent implementation effectively. Outdated and cumbersome rules must be simplified to reduce delays and inefficiency. The key underlying principle of reforms should focus on transparency to reduce corruption, meritocracy to improve competence, accountability for results linked to development outcomes, professionalism through specialization and training, a delegation of decision-making powers to lower levels, and the use of technology for improved efficiency. Dear students, while concluding this lecture, we can say that the role of the state and its bureaucracy in bringing about economic, social, and political development is expanding. The bureaucracy participates in policy formulation by functioning as a channel of communication, a repository of information, as a group of specialists, and as an impartial advisor. The bureaucracy in each ministry and also in overhead agencies like the Finance Ministry and the Planning Commission periodically reviews the implementation of each program. The problems of bureaucratization emerge due to the unnecessary emphasis on routine, red tape, unresponsiveness to the people, increasing cost of administration, the great power of the bureaucracy, and the danger of dictatorship. These problems can be dealt with by educating the people, by organizing them in associations and political parties, and by developing panchayats and municipal bodies of local self-government. While the Indian bureaucracy and development plays an important role, several problems limit its effectiveness. Holistic reforms focusing on transparency, meritocracy, accountability, professionalism, decentralization, and technology can help transform the bureaucracy into a more agile and effective development partner. Only then can India fully leverage its bureaucracy for faster and more inclusive development. So dear students, it was all about today's lecture on role of bureaucracy in development. Hope you got good inputs on it. We will meet again to discuss another lecture. Till then, take care. Goodbye.